Here, I got all the latest products from Apple and Samsung in 6 major categories they compete in. I'll be comparing their earbuds, watches, phones, tablets, and even laptops. So let's see which one is better in each of these categories. Starting with the segment that I think just got the biggest shakeup, which is the thin and light laptops. The new Snapdragon X Elite ARM processor really did change things for Samsung, and with the new Galaxy Book 4 Edge, the laptop game just got much closer than before. However, it's not quite enough to beat Apple on its first try. Even though some of the benchmark numbers are very close, the Snapdragon X Elite only gets those scores on the best performance mode, which is not that efficient and gets pretty bad battery life. And it needs the best battery life mode to keep up with the M3 MacBook Air in terms of battery life. But in this setting, it's 28% slower than the MacBook Air, and even in its best performance setting, the GPU is still 33% slower than the M3. I have way more detailed testing in my previous Windows on ARM video, but the gist is it's a huge step forward in terms of the battery life and efficiency for the Windows side. Even though it's not beating the M3 in the latest MacBook Air, I think most would still be very happy with the amount of performance for daily use. So performance aside, let's talk about these laptops physically. The MacBook Air is still a little thinner, and I think the overall build quality is a bit higher. It's more rigid overall with less keyboard deck flex. Plus, the Book 4 Edge doesn't have a haptic trackpad, even though many other Windows laptops already got it. And the haptic trackpads are just so much nicer to use with even clicking force and feedback everywhere. But the Book 4 Edge does have some special tricks, such as an AMOLED touchscreen display. It's 120Hz, but not particularly bright, being about the same brightness as the LCD display in the MacBook Air. And it might just be one of the only Windows on ARM laptops that has an actually decent anti-reflection coating. But the MacBook Air has an awesome coating as well. But aside from the display, the M3 MacBook Air is a bit better in all the other aspects. The build, trackpad, plus more performance and battery life. I feel like Samsung could have put up a better fight since their Intel offerings has better chassis with bigger batteries and can be had as a 2-in-1. So just drop this processor in there and there would have been much more reason to get this over a MacBook. But right now, the MacBook Air is definitely the winner of this round. So that's 0-1 to Apple. Now, Buds. The new Buds 3 and Buds 3 Pro just got released, and they look pretty similar to the latest AirPods, which means in terms of comfort and fit, they're basically identical. If one fits you well, the other will work fine too, and their controls are basically the same too. For the Pro lineup, their feature set is actually super similar as well. Both have active noise cancelling, transparency mode, and this adaptive mode where it's a blend between the noise cancelling and transparency. So when you're in a quiet room, it'll basically be in transparency mode. But as your environment gets louder, such as stepping into a bus, they would turn on more and more noise cancelling. And the noise cancelling performance of the Buds 3 Pro and the AirPods Pro is also surprisingly close. They measure almost exactly the same. I tried both of them in an Uber, and I really couldn't say if one is doing a better job than the other. And when it comes to the transparency mode, I could definitely tell that the AirPods Pro 2nd gen is better than the previous gen Galaxy Buds 2 Pros. But with the Buds 3 Pro, the transparency mode is now just as good. Other people's voices and my own voice sounds natural through them. However, the Buds 3 Pro do have a slight but audible hiss in its transparency mode. As for the case design, the Buds 3 Pro have a little transparent top and it kind of looks like plants in a greenhouse. Also, the top is actually flat, so they can stand upside down. The transparent part also showcases the lights that run down the stem of the buds. The lights don't really do much. They do look cool when you first open the case, and if you're into the look, you can pinch them to have them glowing in your ears. But the AirPods Pro 2nd gen has the more practical packaging. The case is smaller and less thick. The pods themselves are a little bit smaller too, and somehow Apple also managed to squeeze in a pair of speakers in the case. And this makes them easier to find. For the Galaxy Buds, the case doesn't ring, but the buds themselves can ring through the case, and the lights do flash as well. The slightly larger size of the Buds 3 Pro is partially due to having 2 speakers squeezed into each bud. Having 2 speakers doesn't guarantee that the sound quality will be better. I think the sound quality overall is pretty close between the two, and it's pretty subjective which one you'd prefer. The Galaxy Buds has more bass and treble, whereas the AirPods are more vocal focused. I personally prefer the sound of the Galaxy Buds 3 Pro. They're just a bit more exciting. For Apple's earbuds lineup, they've always had silicone in-ear tips for the Pro line and no tips for the non-Pro line. Samsung used to have silicone tips for both their Pro and non-Pro buds, but this year they actually switched to be just like the AirPods lineup. So the Buds 3 Pro has the ear tips, but the Buds 3 don't now. What's interesting is that the Buds 3 still has active noise cancelling, which is better than nothing. I don't have one here, but I wouldn't get your hopes too high about their ANC abilities because not having a seal just naturally inhibits their ability to produce deep bass. Overall, I would say this category is a tie. They're more similar than they're different. The sound quality, fit, noise cancelling, and transparency are great on both. the Buds 3 Pro's interesting styling might not be worth the extra size of the case. So both get half a point, and that's 0.5 to 1.5 with Apple in the lead. As for the watch, I have here the Apple Watch Series 9 and the Galaxy Watch 7, which was just refreshed. Both come in two sizes. The square shape of the Apple Watch might let you see a bit more info compared to the round Galaxy Watch, since it doesn't cut off like a circle. But either way is fine, and some might prefer the more classic look of a round watch. But the construction is more different than you think, because if you go for the cheapest Apple Watch with an aluminum rim like this one here, it actually doesn't have a sapphire screen. I think the sapphire screen is pretty necessary for a watch, especially if you frequently bump into things. The sapphire is harder than most metal, so it won't scratch. All the Galaxy watches have a sapphire screen, whereas for the Apple Watch, you have to step up to the stainless steel model, which is much more expensive to get the sapphire screen. But the other aspects are similar, including the screen brightness at 2000 nits peak, dust resistance, and the exact same water resistance down to 50 meters. The Galaxy Watch also got a new 3nm processor, and it also has a bigger battery. It's about 6% bigger for the smaller watches and 38% bigger for the larger watches. I have the two smaller versions, and in an hour of workout tracking, both lost 8%, so they ended up being about the same. As for the software, both have quite a lot of watch face options just by default. I love this Snoopy one on the Apple Watch. It changes every single time. And you can add some shortcuts right onto the watch face for both of them. The UI is slightly different, but they have pretty much the same elements, like you get the notifications and the widgets. For both watches, there are a lot of widget options, but only the Galaxy Watch has a earbuds controller, which lets you toggle between the different modes like noise canceling and adaptive. Oh yeah, and for the Galaxy Watch, you can swipe around the bezel to quickly scroll through the widgets. The Apple Watch equivalent is scrolling the knob, and both give a pretty satisfying haptic feedback. But lots of people get a smartwatch to track workout and general health metrics. Both can do a lot of that, such as sleep tracking, calories used, heart rate, blood oxygen, and even ECG. The Galaxy Watch can do more though, being now FDA approved to detect sleep apnea. But what I find the most interesting is body composition. There are sensors here on the side buttons, and you just kind of do this to measure your body composition. It's a nice way to keep track of your progress in the gym. With these metrics, you can tell if you're gaining muscle and losing fat, even if total weight stays the same. Overall, the Galaxy Watch's hardware is a better value with a sapphire screen and more sensors that allow for body composition measurement. So 1.5 points to Samsung versus 1.5 for Apple. Now let's talk about the tablets, specifically the Galaxy Tab S9 Ultra and the newly refreshed iPad Pro with the M4 chip. And the new iPad not only extended its lead for performance, but also took away the S9 Ultra's only advantage, being the OLED display. The S9 Ultra has a great OLED screen, which did look better than the mini LEDs in the older iPad Pros, since it has zero blooming. But now the new M4 iPad Pro comes with a tandem OLED that's just as bright. When watching content, the S9 Ultra provides a much larger image, mostly due to its aspect ratio. But in terms of the quality, they're very similar. Both have pure blacks and crazy highlights for HDR content. Also, they're both 120Hz and great for things like gaming and drawing. And as for drawing, there's a new Apple Pencil Pro that can now roll and be found with Find My. I'm not an artist, but I am a pencil loser and can definitely make use of the Find My feature. While the S Pen has a button, the Apple Pencil Pro can now be squeezed with haptic feedback and double tapped. However, there's still some aspects that I do like about the S9 Ultra, namely DeX. I think the more computer-like desktop layout makes a lot of sense for a big tablet, especially when plugged into a keyboard with trackpad. And Stage Manager in this regard just isn't quite as flexible and capable. Here on DeX, I have 5 windows opened, and I can snap them by dragging them to the corners, and they can also be freely resized and laid on top of each other. But overall, Samsung really needs to upgrade to keep up with Apple. The Tab S9 Ultra still has the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 processor, which is slower than the 8 Gen 3 in the S24s, which is much slower than the Elite ARM processor, which kind of keeps up with the M3, which is a whole generation behind the M4 in the iPad Pro. So yeah, the performance is just not even close. If you're into hardcore gaming on a tablet or some more professional apps, an iPad is the way to go. To be fair though, the 8 Gen 2 is still very snappy for typical tablet tasks like casual gaming, watching movies, and things like that. And it's also fair to say that the M4 is kind of wasted on the iPad Pro. You could render videos on it, but you probably wouldn't want to because the software on the iPad just aren't as good as their computer counterparts. Both tablets are extremely thin with a big impressive screen, but the iPad Pro is faster than most computers, while the Tab S9 Ultra is slower than my phone. So Apple takes this one convincingly, 1.5 to 2.5. Now onto their flagship phones. Apple has 2 sizes for their flagship, while Samsung just has a bigger size. If you want the best camera but in a smaller phone, I guess Apple's the only one that offers it with the iPhone 15 Pro. But actually, the smaller one only gets 3x for its telephoto camera, while the 15 Pro Max here gets 5x. And I really like the 5x camera. It makes the camera set more diverse and lets me get these cool portrait shots, or just use it to see faraway signs. Samsung's Ultra phone used to have a 10x camera, but this year, they decided to drop it for a high-res 5x camera, which I think is better overall since it provides a more consistent coverage. But because the S24 Ultra's 5x sensor is 50 megapixels, at 10x, it still looks better than the iPhone. The railing here looks a bit more detailed, but the difference isn't that big. Of course, the S24 Ultra and the iPhone 15 Pro Max also have an ultra-wide selfie and main camera, but the S24 Ultra actually has one extra camera, a 3x telephoto. It's good quality, but nothing too special. It does beat punching in 3 times with the iPhone's main camera though. And as for their main cameras, the S24 Ultra has 200 megapixels, while the 15 Pro Max has 48 megapixels. Here are some photos side by side. The biggest difference isn't the resolution, but actually the colors, with the Samsung being less contrasty and more saturated. The technical aspects are really close. Both are very detailed in the 50 megapixel mode, and the Samsung's 200 megapixel mode doesn't really make it better while being much larger in file size. Moving on to the design. Both phones have titanium sides now with a matte glass back. So they're more similar than different, with the exception being the S24 Ultra has a pen. The displays on them are both great, with the S24 Ultra being a little brighter on paper, reaching 2600 nits peak versus 2000 nits for the iPhone. But in real life, the difference is very marginal, both with HDR content and just using them in sunlight. But there's definitely still a winner here, and that's the Samsung, because its anti-reflection coating is just straight up magical. When outside or just in any room with a decent amount of light, the Samsung is easier to see and the content on it looks like it has better contrast. I think that's pretty obvious here with them side by side. When it comes to battery life, flagship Samsung phones and iPhones used to always be pretty close. But this year, the difference is kind of crazy. The S24 Ultra has a 13% larger battery, and in my mixed use case test starting from 100% with 1 hour of gaming and then video looping until they die, the S24 Ultra lasted over an hour longer than the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Of course, the difference might be bigger or smaller depending on how you use it, but you can see the entire test here. For performance, this is the first time that the Samsung is faster, at least for some of the things. The GPU is about 16% faster, while the CPU performance is trailing just a little bit behind. In reality, especially since I'm not a hardcore mobile gamer, both feel very fast. Overall, the S24 Ultra just has better hardware, with a much better anti-reflection coating, an extra camera, and not to mention, it also has a pen inside. All that while keeping up and surpassing the iPhone in terms of battery life and performance sometimes. So 1 more point to Samsung and 2.5 points tied. Now for the phones that are just 1 tier below the flagships, the iPhone 15 versus S24. I feel like for the non-Pro iPhone, Apple really held out on a lot of nice features, such as a 120Hz display, and they don't even get a telephoto camera. At least the main camera is updated this year and has 48 megapixels. It's a great camera that can kind of double as a 2x telephoto, but the problem is the S24 also has a high-resolution main camera while also giving you a 3x telephoto at the same price point. The iPhone 15 does have an OLED display that's just as bright as a Pro at 2000 nits, but it's still only a fixed 60 Hz. Not only does it feel way less smooth, but it also means no always-on display. The S24 display is slightly brighter, 120Hz, and can also have a fully colored always-on display like the Pro iPhone and the Ultra. With a good-looking wallpaper, it almost feels like decor sitting there. I like it. And it doesn't even stop there. While the S24 gets the same processor as a flagship, the iPhone 15 gets a cut-down version of the last-gen processor, making it much slower. This has gotta be one of the most convincing wins for Samsung. And I do like the S24 more than the iPhone 15 in basically every aspect. I really think it's time Apple stop holding the nice things to be only for the Pro lineup. There's just no reason why you wouldn't enjoy a 120Hz display even if you're not a Pro. So Samsung takes a 3.5 to 2.5 points lead. But here's a bonus round. There are many product categories that only one of the companies make that I think are fun, such as Samsung with their folding phones and now a smart ring. It's like an alternative to the smartwatch for health tracking. And the 2 folding phones are on their 6th generation now and have become pretty refined. The crease is definitely lessened, but it's still there. I think folding phones are cool and do have their unique benefits, like using the main camera for selfies on the Z Flip, or basically having a mini tablet in your pocket with the Fold. You can even use it with a pen. But Apple probably has the most staring product, the Vision Pro. I did test it out. It is very cool and well executed, especially for Gen 1. The image through it is incredibly sharp, but it's just not very useful right now. Also pretty heavy on the face and very expensive. So although Apple has some dominant wins in laptop and tablets, when it comes to the other devices, Samsung, at least in terms of the hardware, is just as good, if not better. So it takes the overall win. But that's not considering lots of the software features and things like the ecosystem. Check out these videos to see which ecosystem you would prefer.